Can you first just start by giving us just a frontline war update? What's the situation like right now in Ukraine?
Okay, yeah, Velika Novosilka fell. Now that was it was not a very large town. I think we're talking about a few thousand prior to the to 2022. Uh, but it was a strategically important town. It was one of these fortified towns, kind of fortress towns that, again, that the Ukrainians built up over the course of several years following the coup in 2014. Um, so its capture by the Russians is quite significant. Now there really is nothing to the west of them and in that part of the Donbass. We're talking about the very southern part of the Donbass, actually quite close to the Zaporozhye region. So that actually opens their way into Zaporozhye too, which remember is something that they claim as their own territory. So I think there's no question that they're going to push into Zaporozhye at some point. Um, it's also notable that Salvika Novosilka, it it fell rather quickly. I mean, the Russians took their time surrounding it, but when they actually pushed into it, it only lasted a few days, and the town itself is not, there's clearly damage, but it's not in ruins the way, let's say, Bakhmut was after the fighting there. And that's something that we're seeing again with some of the others. Yeah, I think it was Selidova and other. These towns are falling faster. Where it used to take maybe few weeks of fighting to take a town of that size. Kind of the Ukrainians would just had their pillboxes and trenches, tunnels, and their fortified high rises, so they had all these very well fortified positions, and they defended each one of them fiercely. So it just, you basically had to destroy the town to take it, and that's what we saw, up until recently. But now we're seeing that the Ukrainians either just don't have the means or they don't have the will to really put up the resistance. So when it comes to the storming of the town falls quickly, and so now, it's a slightly different story farther north, but also very notable Russian victories. The city of Toretsk is, for all intents and purposes, has been taken by the Russians. And now that was a large city. We're talking, close to 100,000 if you include the larger metropolitan area, New York and some of the other suburbs. Um, it it took them some time to take it. Certainly faster than it would have happened, let's say, a year ago. Again, it was highly fortified. It was a large town, really a city, and but they took it, and it's important. Again, it's one of the very, very last of the fortress cities. You could say that it really is. Now, the last one where the battle is ongoing is in Chasiv Yar. Now, that's a place where the Ukrainians have put up very fierce resistance, and so it has been a bloody uh, fight, but it is coming to an end, and that's it's a difficult city to take, or town, I guess we should call it. It's not particularly large because it was up on high ground, kind of like Ugledar was in the south, and it was very, very heavily fortified. But the Russians have taken it, or close to taking it. Like they're about 90%. I think it's just a matter of days, maybe a couple of weeks at the most, and it'll be completely captured by the Russians. And with that capture, it's just like all of the uh, central and southern Donbass is um, is now going to be kind of just open to a more rapid Russian advance. Now, probably the next city that they're going to go after is Pokrovsk, which they're right now in the process of encircling. Pokrovsk is an important city, but it's not one of these fortress cities. It was a hub. It was probably the most important logistical hub for the Ukrainians that supported all these fortress cities. So now the Russians have just about defeated all of them. The last one will be Chasiv Yar, and then we got Pokrovsk. Now the Russians, because they essentially have a semicircle now. They've half encircled it. Um, they have deprived its use as a hub, to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians you simply can't use it as a hub the way they used to. So they've already achieved that goal. And then the next thing is once they take it, and though it's quite large, I think, when you're talking about Minograd and Pokrovsk together, it's close to 100,000. It's not, again, it's not fortified the way that like Toretsk was or Avdiivka. And again, the Ukrainians are just not showing the ability to resist the way they did. So I think even though it's quite large, it could fall relatively quickly. It's so large that I think it'll probably take at least a couple months after the assault begins. But that's really not that long for a city of that size. And again, once they have it, it'll become their own logistical hub for future operations moving to the west. So again, I predict we'll see that a continuing acceleration of the Russian advance. We're entering into a new phase of the war, with this really bloody fighting through the defensive belt that the Ukrainians created in eastern Donbass. That's coming to an end, and then we're going to just have something closer to a march, across the steppe towards the Dnieper. Now there's also fighting going on in the north. The Russians are making. They have 2 or 3 very large bridgeheads. They've crossed the Oskol River north of Kupiansk, and so now they're approaching Kupiansk from 2 directions. And then farther south, they have a bridgehead across the Zherovets River, and are approaching Liman. So these are both in the Kharkov region. So they've made considerable advances there too over the last few months, and will probably continue to do so. And if they take Kupiansk and Kharkov, then I think we'll see something similar in Kharkov. If they have not declared the intention to take Kharkov region. Kharkov region has the city of Kharkov, which is the second largest city in all of Ukraine. But it's very much a kind of a Russian-leaning city. That whole region is Russian-speaking, and so many people believe that they're going to take that, inevitably.
It seems like there's no doubt that Russia will win this war. Is clearly at the end. I mean, they're coming through the last bit of fortifications. Then it's just open roads in front of them, kind of what you're telling me, that it should be much easier for them to move on. So there has to be an acknowledgement within Ukraine that the war is lost, right? Or an acknowledgement within the West. Is that true now?
Yeah.
That people have said, yes, this war
you're
is
seeing
lost.
that more and more. There was an article that came out in The Economist, which is one of the leading, let's say, news magazines of the world. I used to subscribe to it like back in the 90s, early 2000s. And it's a very intelligent magazine, but it's also always been very much a neocon kind of magazine. And very Russophobic. They hate Putin with a passion. They've been ardent supporters of Ukraine in this war, and they in general they've gone along with this very kind of pro-Ukraine spin. But just recently, I think it was just a few days, the most recent issue, they came out with an article that said that, actually the headline, the title of the article was like, the Ukrainian defenses in Donbass are crumbling. And I think that's true. If maybe it's not quite right to say collapsing. I think it's like they're beginning to collapse. A collapse is like it's just, okay, it falls and then there's nothing. There's still some kind of resistance, but the resistance is clearly weakening, and weakening rather dramatically. So let's go with the verb that The Economist itself is admitted to. Their defenses are crumbling there.
Right. Well, or we can go with the words of Budanov. Budanov apparently said that Ukraine will collapse within 6 months. Yeah, and I think he used the word collapse, like won't exist, I believe, something like this, right?
Yeah, right. It sounded like he said, like, if things don't change within 6 months, it's over. And there will be a collapse. I think that's the way I understood his words.
Right. And things will change. But against Ukraine, things are going to change. Not
right.
In
All
the
the trends
favor.
are going right. Exactly.
So
you just can't see it. Nobody can actually kind of give any sort of believable scenario where Ukraine wins. It turns this around. That's just not possible. All the trends are in the favor of Russia. They talk about, we got to give them more weapons. We've been hearing this for 3 years now, and there aren't any more, wonder weapons to give them. And the wonder weapons, all prove not to be so wonderful after all, of course. And again, the West has drawn down its stockpiles. It just doesn't produce anywhere near as much as the Russians do. Mark Rutte himself admitted that it was a 1-to-4 ratio in favor of Russian production of munitions. So there's just nothing. If you're at all realistic, there is just no possible way, path to Ukrainian victory.
So
go ahead.
So what's the plan then from the Western world? I mean, if there's this acknowledgement now that, okay, this war is lost, then clearly the rational thing to do is to cut a deal now so Ukraine is able to retain more of its territory. Why isn't that happening? Like, this is like, right. What are they hoping? Are they hoping just a meteorite's going to follow the sky and hit Moscow?
I mean, so, right. It's just, yeah. Okay, well, first of all, a lot of these people are deluded. I think Zelensky himself, I think, understands on some level that he's losing, and that for him, it's just a Hail Mary. He has to start World War III, and that's the only way he can get out of it. I think, that explains his behavior. He's just trying to do whatever he can to draw the NATO into this more directly and on a larger scale, to the point where it becomes an actual NATO versus Russia conflict. And that that's his plan, is, if there's a plan. And I think unfortunately, there are some leaders in the West that agree with that. Probably just the Baltic states, but even the Poles don't want to do that. They actually have said that, oh no, we're not doing that. We're not going in there. So you get a lot of just wishful thinking, as I think a lot of Western leaders are just deluded, just don't want to believe what's happening, and they continue to insist. They say the same thing, is that we need to just give them more weapons so to improve their negotiating position. Now, we've been hearing that, and for better, like the last 2.5 years, easily their negotiating position has been getting worse and worse and worse. And there's just no reason to believe that, like, the next shipment of weapons to Ukraine, which is almost certainly going to be less than the previous shipments, is going to make any difference. It just won't. You can't explain to me how it could. Why did all the previous ones fail? Why has their negotiating position gotten worse and worse? What makes you think that now it'll get better after this shipment of weapons? But they still say it. I mean, that's partly just in the nature of politicians. I think a lot of them, they just don't want to admit failure. It's just very hard to say, okay, yeah, we went down the wrong road here, and acknowledge that my opponent, acknowledge that these distant parties were right. It's just something that they can't get themselves to do. So they simply, maybe on one level they realize what they're doing is not working, but they say, maybe we can just drag this on farther, and then there will be that asteroid from the sky or something, or at least maybe I'll complete my term and I can retire comfortably. And then let somebody else deal with the defeat. I just don't want it to happen on my watch.
Right. The more hopeless the situation gets, and the more that somebody like Zelensky tries to do a Hail Mary pass to start World War III, the more people are aware of what he's trying to do. And it just looks bad on Ukraine and on the West in general. I mean, we're seeing, cutting off the gas now to Europe. They're trying to blow up. It seems like they were trying to blow up a nuclear power plant. The acts of terrorism to provoke Russia. Just the more that they do this, the worse Ukraine looks, and the worse the Western backers look, because they're inextricably tied to this now. So, and it's becoming more and more apparent. So the idea of some type of successful World War III instigation is just, it's not, I don't think it's possible. And the more you try it, the worse, bigger of a hole you're going to dig yourself. So I just don't, surely there's a shift. Clearly, there's a narrative break. You said The Economist is saying that the Donbass fortifications are crumbling. The defenses are Ukrainian forces are crumbling there. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a change in the tone of the narrative. Are we seeing a shift within politicians? We have obviously Hungary and Slovakia, to some extent Italy, kind of saying that this is not what we want to do. Are we seeing more of a shift? Some politicians offering some words of rationality to their people, like, "Hey, this is not working out for us. This clearly is a war that we can't win. Our economies are suffering. What are we doing here?"
Yeah.
Is that
Unfortunately, I don't think we are. The big three in European NATO would be the UK, France, and Germany. And within the ruling establishment, we're not seeing it. Now, all of those countries have dissident politicians that are quite popular, that are making these criticisms, but they are being kept out of power. Of course, we have in France, we have the National Rally, but also the leftists led by Mélenchon. And then, we've talked about the AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht's party in Germany. And then in UK, there's actually Nigel Farage, who is, I don't think he's been quite as clear and consistent as, let's say, the National Rally and the AfD. But he has made real criticisms of Project Ukraine, of UK's support for it. And his party, according to most recent polls, is the most popular party in the country now. I mean, the Labour, led by Keir Starmer, has just plummeted in the polls ever since he took power. So you have, I don't see any kind of recognition on the part of the establishment within Europe. But you do see these rising power parties, and maybe one of them will finally, succeed, take office, and maybe will actually, change, put those countries and put Europe on a new course. We'll see. Again, as we've said many times, the establishment has thought this. They used all kinds of dirty tricks to prevent this from happening, and that they're not gonna go down without a fight. So
right?
There's nothing certain about the future in Europe.
Well, one thing that I think is changing the landscape a bit is Trump again. The fact that he signed that executive order to suspend all foreign aid except to Israel and Egypt. And apparently the Pentagon munitions are still flowing to Ukraine. Those arrangements are still in place. But
Right.
it still has been substantial, I believe, in the Ukraine war, because it suspended funding to Ukrainian media and NGOs, which essentially these are propaganda arms. This is
Right.
what, and I'm wondering, when you go on Twitter or X, you see all those Doge avatars. I was always really like, are these guys being funded by my taxpayer dollars to tell me that I'm the Russian propagandist?
Yeah, basically that's what's going on. Yeah,
right. So I think we're going to see
these propaganda organs. They're feeding the propaganda back to us.
Yeah, we're funding. It's so wild. Yeah, we're funding the propaganda,
Right.
and then they feed it to us, and we gobble up like, "Oh, it's true," but we're paying for their propaganda. I guess it's our propaganda, but we fall for our own propaganda. It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
But clearly, this has to be devastating to the morale of Ukraine, because, especially someone like Zelensky, he's a PR guy. He's all about the narrative. If they lose funding to these organizations, these NGOs, these media companies, they can no longer control the narrative as well. And once we talked about this before, what you really need to do is you need to break the narrative. Once the narrative is broken and the truth is able to come through, then we might be able to actually sit down at the table like actual real adults, instead of kids living in fantasy land, and hash this out and end this bloodshed, end this war. Do you think that's what we're seeing?
Well,
how big of an impact
potentially. I mean, it
is.
Yeah, I have to say that. Right. This executive order by Trump is, like many of his executive orders, is just quite significant, and it potentially will have a huge impact. I mean, it already is having an impact. It remains to be seen if he can hold firm, because the pressure, a huge pressure is being brought to bear, on him. not just for the cutoff of aid to Ukraine, but to other countries as well. Um, but we'll see. Again, he seems to be he came out of the corner swinging this time. With
Yeah,
real
guns
vigor and
blazing.
determination, and he's in for a big fight. Again, it's just the deep state is not just going to walk away and give everything to him. Though they may give him some things in the short run, but they're going to work hard at subverting his efforts in the long run. And they do have a lot of weapons at their disposal, and they're very good at having their way. And we've seen that in previous presidencies. So I wouldn't assume that Trump will have his way. Um, I think actually, unfortunately, the smart money is still on the deep state. But, I am impressed again with his vigor and determination and, the fact that he's done what he's done. And so I wouldn't count him out entirely. I just, I do hope that he sticks to his guns, and particularly with regard to support for Ukraine.
Yeah, I don't know if my money's on the deep state this time. Maybe I'm just being optimistic. It's well, one thing is because the deep state is exposed. We've talked about this before. People realize that, yeah, the deep state's a real thing, and we see it. And clearly, Trump is clearly at war with the deep state in many respects.
Yeah.
And then with all this NGO funding, I don't think people understood, even within the countries where we were doing attempted color revolutions or successful color revolutions,
Right.
the amount of involvement that the U.S. had in those color revolutions. That we had,
Right.
like you said, the country of Georgia has you said more NGOs than like.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary, like tens of thousands or something, it's just
Right,
really
like 10% of the population is basically employed by the U.S. government there,
Right.
Like by the National Endowment of Democracy, I don't know if 10%, but a large percentage, obviously.
Yeah,
So,
right.
and they're controlling the media organs and they're organized, and that's how they foment color revolutions. We back whatever party hates Russia in Georgia, and we support it. We pump money in. A third of the protesters that they arrested in Georgia were not even Georgian citizens. They were being bussed in or flown in from
Right.
from the EU, and that's probably funding from U.S. foreign aid to these NGOs, to whatever it is our organizations are. All of a sudden, that's cut, and then all of a sudden you think of,
yeah,
or at least we don't know if everything is, but I'm sure a lot of it.
a good
It's
share,
caused
right.
So countries like Georgia or obviously Ukraine, Venezuela, all over the world, we are involved in this. And then if we stop, all of a sudden there might be just this respite where, okay, we're not being fed this Western propaganda constantly, and then you get back to sort of a stable equilibrium. And once that veil's been lifted, I don't think you can put it back over. You can't restart the NGO.
It's hard. It's
right. The game,
exactly.
the jig's up. You know, it's
So
the same
the
thing.
longer this goes, the more significant it becomes. If like all the funding is reinstated next week, it'll be a blip and it won't really have any significance in the long run. But if I think it's the executive order was supposed to extend to 90 days, and if it does go on for 90 days, and then at the end of those 90 days, a lot of these programs are ended. Oh yeah, this is very, very meaningful. I mean, this is. It would be a huge achievement and a real blow against the blob.
Right. That's just a huge pillar of this U.S. hegemonic order. That if we stop that, it's like, great, we can come back, and stop trying to meddle into everybody's elections, everybody's affairs. And it's ironic because we're always blaming, Russia or China of interfering while we are funneling billions of dollars openly, right, to every single country. And if we just end that, I think that would just be such a wonderful thing. So, and it's possible. And like I said, maybe 90 days is enough to do enough damage to it that it will no longer be effective, even if they do try starting it up again. That's my hope. It's just like you're saying with Netanyahu. The Gaza ceasefire happened, starting it back up again. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
So that's my hope, but we'll see. Why do you think Trump hasn't talked to Putin yet? We said he's come out swinging, guns blazing. He did the hostage deal the ceasefire even before he became inaugurated. He signed all these executive orders, and he's talking about ending this Ukraine conflict within 24 hours of day one. But he hasn't talked to him yet. Why is that?
I don't know. Yeah, I know that there's been speculation about that, of course. One thing is maybe he's starting to realize. Let's see. This is the best possible, I think, interpretation. This is the one I hope is true, and that is that maybe he's beginning to realize that things aren't as he imagined. From many of his previous comments, he seemed to believe it seemed to indicate that he believed that Russia was on the ropes. The Russian economy was in tatters. Russia was desperate for a way out of this. They had a million of their men had already been killed, and so on and so forth. Who knows where he got this information? Maybe it was just from watching TV. Maybe it was from some corrupt,
Well, we explained it, right?
intelligence advice.
It's our funding of these propaganda in Ukraine that which gets fed back to us. That's what it is.
Right,
It's
and
our own.
yeah, and then of course we have those our intelligence agencies that joined to the hip, and they, maybe the CIA has contracted out a lot of the intelligence gathering and analysis to Ukraine, and so we're just getting fed up a lot of nonsense. By the way, I think it was Chas Freeman was saying that, yeah, he agreed that a lot of the CIA was, intelligence had been corrupted and is not reliable. He felt that it was actually like the DIA, the Pentagon intelligence, was more reliable, so that if Trump wanted to get reliable intelligence, he really should go to the Pentagon and maybe stop listening to the CIA. Anyway, that's just an aside. So again, I hope that what's happening is that Trump is learning the truth. That would be wonderful, and is starting to realize that maybe the approach that he had envisaged was not going to succeed, and that he would have to go about this differently. Maybe there's a reassessment. Maybe this is something that Alexander Mercouris argues. It's just, and I think it's true. It's just like the typically it is the weaker party in negotiations that approaches the party that's in a stronger position. The weaker party really needs something. And
That's us.
so, yeah, right. Well, that's the truth is, but Trump has been trying to pretend and maybe really believes that we're the stronger party, but we're not in this. We're on the losing side of this war. We are not the weaker party. And then we've already imposed the sanctions. The threat of more sanctions is laughable. I heard the other day that we've imposed 24,311 sanctions on Russia. Russia is the most sanctioned country on earth. And so you think, are they terrified by the thought of a few more sanctions? This is absurd. So anyway,
24,312 will break Russia's back.
Oh, no.
The last straw.
Right, exactly. So, we don't have the leverage. And so if he really believes that we're the stronger party, and it's not appropriate for the stronger party to approach the weaker party, then he's really, obviously deluded. And but maybe at some point it'll dawn on him that no, it's actually we need help from the Russians and we need to approach them.
Do you think?
I don't know what's going on, but those are possibilities.
Do you think that maybe Trump even will just want to let Ukraine collapse and just say like this was all Biden's fault, like look what he did, and then
well, he could, yeah,
this
this is something we just, again, I think that's really that would be the smartest way for him to approach it. Again, I don't, there's just no way that I think he can negotiate a settlement with Russia. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just seems like that's politically impossible, because it would be kind of in writing an acknowledgement of our defeat, and the U.S. just doesn't do that, or is very, very, very reluctant to do that. I think Trump himself would be, but we could just walk away from it, and the war would end quickly. It would be an obvious Russian victory. They would march to wherever they wanted to go, and they would take that territory. But if he played it right, again, using the cards that we described earlier, pointing to the fact of all the money that's been wasted on this, and money that should be spent at home, all the corruption in Ukraine. Um, he and then making it clear too is that this is Biden's defeat. I didn't choose to start this war; he did, and it was a huge mistake. And so, constantly repeating, "This is Biden. What you're watching is, Biden's defeat." Um, it, I think it would be a tough sell because there's going to be a lot of screaming and much of the media. But again, the media is now fractured. It's a kind of a um, divided landscape where it used to be, speak with one voice. Now, Trump has a lot of loyal media that will support him. But, of
Right.
course, that establishment legacy media is just going to be screaming at the top of the lungs, that this was a betrayal. This was, he made a deal with Putin, whatever. They're going to try to do what they can to make him pay the cost of it. But I think he could, if he, again, played his cards right, survive it and come out on top. Now, the question is just kind of his own personality. He just, one thing is like he made so much out of, the retreat from Afghanistan. And he clearly does not want to have that pinned on him. And maybe just the fear of having something similar pinned on him is going to prevent him from going that route. We'll see.
Mm. Right. Trump made that move also to give like White House press passes to podcasters and influencers. Maybe we can get you in there, Dad. Wouldn't that be great? Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually a very wise move. I mean, that's
Right.
just a recognition of the new landscape. It seems like, I have to say that clearly he or some of the people around him have learned something in the last 4 years. In the first 4 years, it just seemed like I think a lot of people were trying to point that out to him. That for example, like you need to do something about these social media companies because they're weaponized against you. And he really didn't do anything. And then, of course, he got kicked off of Twitter himself.
Right. And
Right.
yeah, I think off of
Yeah. So
everywhere,
now,
Facebook.
but I think all of his experiences in the impeachment, it was clear, the Russia hoax, the first impeachment that was actually, um, um, which used it as its justification, right? His threat to cut supplies to Ukraine, all of those events taught him something, and so he does seem to have learned something. I'll admit it. I think he's shown um, a more understanding than I expected from him. So I am more hopeful. I'm a little less cynical, we'll admit, but I just know that deep state is still there and they're going to fight back. So, this is not over.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Well, he's so ironic. Trump ends up. It's like this guy. Yeah. I mean, you want to save the world or destroy the world? It's hard to know.
Yeah,
But
it's not clear. Right.
But yeah, I am a little bit more hopeful. I think, like I said, all those experiences plus, surviving an assassination attempt, I'm sure that makes you look at life a little bit differently and you kind of understand what you're up against. Yeah, I mean, do you think this is politically possible, viable? Like, it would just be so great if Trump goes over to Moscow and talks to Putin and it's like, hey, man, what are we doing? Like, why? We don't need to be enemies. Like, just the world would be such a great place if we have
Yeah.
Russia, China, and the U.S. that can all work together and we can have a peaceful and prosperous world where we can, I mean, like, there's no reason to try to have this clash between these superpowers. And we're the one that are demanding it, but we're in the worst position to handle any type of conflict if war broke out with China or Russia. So it's just like there's, and I think probably Trump has to have some realization of that, and he has the personality that just wants to be chummy with everybody. So I mean, I'm just hoping that is that possible? You just go over to them and be like, hey, let's
I can't say it's impossible.
let's bury the hatch and let's work together. We can, you got all that energy, great. Well, we got all this. Let's start trading and working together, and then all of a sudden. Let's be pals again. Is it possible that we can be pals with Russia and China? I mean, like that would just be so good for the world.
Obviously, it's not impossible, but it remains to be seen, and maybe before he appointed people that undermined him, at every turn. One example, of course, was the negotiations with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. that he went, he, I think very correctly, um, offered to meet with them and to negotiate. But he had appointed people like John Bolton, and John Bolton undermined him. He sabotaged those negotiations. He surrounded himself with people who were not loyal to him, who did not believe in, um, who were neocons, who did not share his vision. Now, unfortunately, he's appointed many neocons and many people, many warmongers. Um, but I think there's a difference. He has appointed people that he believes are personally loyal to him.
Right.
Even though they may subscribe to a neocon ideology, and clearly many of them do, including Marco Rubio. Um, he believes that these people, unlike John Bolton, for example, or, or Mike Pence or Nikki Haley, are personally loyal to him. And so perhaps, if he can bend them to his will, even if they don't really share his ideas. For them, they're political creatures, and they understand that they've hitched their wagon to this Trump horse, and that's the way they're going to go. I think that's what we may see. So it may be that, for example, if he really does want to negotiate a settlement, a settlement that has to be favorable to Russia. Um, Perhaps he has enough hold over these people, these people that he's appointed to the State Department and the Pentagon, that he can carry through with it. But it remains to see. I mean, these are huge organizations full of wily operators that have had their way for decades. Now maybe it's finally coming to an end. This is the thing. You get so used to something being one way, you just think it's forever. But perhaps, um, perhaps they will finally lose. I certainly hope so. Again, I'm not going to bet on it. I'm going to bet that they're going to win. But um, eh, this is a new Trump. He seems to be more determined, and he seems to be wiser than he was last time. And he seems to have made appointments that um, that he feels will strengthen his hand vis-a-vis the deep state.